This very Christmastide, I was up from Oxbridge spending time at the London home of my cousin and boyhood playmate, Ellery Dickon. He was a darkly handsome, muscular and thoroughly self-possessed young fellow about town, who, despite our shared history and familial fondness, was one to tease me for being his country cousin who had need of a broader Catholic education. My father being an Anglican minister, Ellery thought the remark particularly adroit, and it amused him greatly, if not perversely. And so I found myself, one evening shortly after my arrival, accompanying him through the sulphurous saffron fog that encompassed London's Piccadilly on the hansom cab ride to a bachelor's party as his esteemed guest, to partake, in company with 11 other celibates, a very select little dinner of what I was to learn was known as the infamous Daring Do Club. In a private room above the Café l'Arago, a sumptuous menu was served by candlelight. A multitude of courses were laid before us, and, throughout the feast, the conversation was witty, if a tad ribald for my liking, though largely entertaining. Laughter rippled as the champagne flowed, though I did note my friend appeared unusually reserved. Holding court at the top of the table was Master of Ceremonies, the Count Nikolai Yovanovitch Bitabolikov, a Russian émigré, rumoured to be related to our own dear Queen, who had brought his fortune and peculiar fancies to our fair isle. He was an extraordinary, exotic presence indeed. His hair was parted down the middle and crimped either side. A pencil moustache was artfully drawn on his white pancake face, with cheeks that bore a suspicion of rouge. What I assumed to be an unnaturally crimson pair of lips parted to reveal a mouthful of overly large ivory teeth that were curiously pointed. The flickering blaze of wax candles in a massive candelabra cast an eerie light over his countenance, making him look even more freakish, if that were possible. Waves of his pungent cologne washed over the company with every swish of his expressive wrists. Once dinner was consumed, coffee and liqueur served and cigars lit, Count Bitabolikov beckoned an attendant, who placed on the table before him an ornate Japanese lacquered box, from which he produced an envelope, slit it open, and tapped on a wine glass with a paper knife for attention.
"Gentlemen, Mr. Dickon,"
he pronounced in his unusually high-pitched whine,
"your challenge, if you should choose to accept it."
The company fell silent. Ellery stiffened and raised his eyebrows expectantly. Count Bitabolikov continued,
"Is to solve the mystery of a haunted house, or else die in the trying."
The declaration was met with stifled sniggers from around the table. Count Bitabolikov was not impressed. His crimson smile shriveled with indignation to the size and texture of a raspberry.
"Ah, but I do not refer to just any haunted house. I refer to number 69.
This additional information was met with a collective gasp from those assembled. Without knowing why, my hair bristled and my skin crawled at the very mention of the accursed number. I turned to Ellery. His pallor was ashen, but his expression otherwise unreadable. There was a silent pause of throbbing suspense.
"Challenge accepted,"
he replied with a curt nod. Count Bitabolikov then proceeded with relish to give a brief outline of the history of number 69 and the evil events that had happened therein. The infamous abode had been inauspiciously constructed on the footprint of an ancient plague pit, and built to the specifications of its first owner and resident, the French merchant banker Henri Minogue, and his third wife, the beauteous 18-year-old Debony. The young and tender Debony was destined to become the first victim of number 69, though she would not be the last. Prior to her advantageous marriage, she had been a famed mannequin in the couture houses of Paris, known by her professional name of La Bâtonnette, the stick. The scandal caused by the liaison of the statuesque 6'6" beauty and 4'70" Henri had caused them to relocate to London, but the long and the short of it was that there would be no happy ending on either side of the Channel. For reasons unknown or undisclosed, shortly after the pair had taken up residence in the accursed villa, Debony had, apparently, tumbled, head first, down the main staircase one dark and stormy night, and snapped in half on the parquet floor below. Worse still was her hideous visage. A dislocated jaw had caused the once beautiful lips to yawn in a grotesque parody of a smile. A monstrous expression that caused the blood to run cold in the veins of anyone so unfortunate as to have seen it. Bereft in having discovered his cher bâtonnet thus disfigured, and non naturel, Henri had hung himself from a hook on the cloakroom door. And thus the nightmare began, as did the ill-fated reputation of the diabolical abode. Families moved in, and equally quickly and inexplicably moved out again. Those inhabitants that had lingered longer inevitably succumbed to a similar fate as the original mistress. There were to be no known exceptions to the rule. On the death of the last owner, whose dislocated jaw and separate halves had mirrored young Debony's gruesome remains, number 69 had passed into the hands of a distant relative, resident in Capri with his young friend, who, upon fear of incarceration in Reading jail should they return to England, had given it into the charge of an esteemed letting agent. Despite the expertise of said agent, they found they had been gifted with a hopeless task, for the house had attracted such a fearful reputation by this stage that no tenant could be induced to take up the lease, no matter how favourable or generous the terms. And so it had remained, empty, as year upon year passed by.
All practical arrangements for your lodgings for the duration will be attended to.
Count Bitobolokov's eyes twinkled with what could only be described as malicious humour.
It only remains for you to name the due day.
Snatching up the gauntlet with both hands, Ellery scoffed.
Tomorrow, then.
Knowing him as I did, I was less convinced by Ellery's bravado than those therein assembled seemed to be. In the hansom cab on our journey home, I tried to engage Ellery in conversation, but as we rocked backward and forward and side to side over the cobbled streets, he was having none of it, seemingly preoccupied with darker thoughts and the challenge at hand. Having arrived back at his plush Mayfair townhouse, I accompanied him up the stone steps and through the front door into the spacious hall where his manservant Dodderidge awaited our return. He took the hastily discarded top hats, swagger stick, and cloaks that were flung at him with his customary efficiency, as I swiftly followed Ellery into the library. He poured us both a generous measure of whisky, and, handing me mine, slumped into his armchair before the fire. I took the seat opposite, and regarded him with masculine concern, the letter in the pocket of the silk-lined interior of my jacket, threatening to burn a hole. The tear-streaked missive had arrived at my halls of residence only a week before. It was from my dear Aunt Ursula, Ellery's Teutonic mamma, and took the form of a desperate plea for my assistance from her Grunewald villa in Berlin, when she had returned upon the death of Ellery's father, in suspicious circumstances. Her only Sohn das Licht meines Lebens had, she had been reliably informed, been acting very queer of late. Always a wilful, rebellious, if thoroughly charming child, young adulthood had brought its own set of challenges, and she had it on good authority, she went on, that he had taken up the fast life of late, and was mixing with a disreputable crowd in pursuit of cheap thrills. Not only were said cheap thrills proving expensive, but, more than this, she was deeply concerned for his moral welfare. Consequently, she had turned to me, the humble son of a preacher man, whom she knew to be the only boy who could ever reach him, and begged my immediate aid. Without hesitation, I telegraphed back my acquiescence to the dear old pussy, hurriedly packed my trunk, and caught the next train up to the smoke. I now chose my words carefully, with which to address him. "Ellery," I began, "you know I've always admired you." He grunted and sipped his drink. "Remember when we were two little boys? How gaily we played each summer's day? But you were always the adventurous one, the brave one. You were always the risk-taker, and I played it safe. I always admired that characteristic, but—" "But what of it?" he snapped. "You think I'm a fool, don't you? You think I've gone completely mad, don't you?" he snarled. "No, never a fool." I shook my head. "Look, I can't comprehend quite why you agreed to this challenge, but—" "No one asked you to." "But," I repeated, "I have come to visit you upon this blessed time of the rolling year, to share in your company and the felicitations of the season. And I'll be darned if I'll sit here twiddling my thumbs before the Christmas tree whilst you go off and confront your demons. No," I said defiantly, "I am coming with you." "No." "Yes," I replied, emboldened. "I will not let you face this load of old bunkum on your own. I am coming too, like it or lump it." "And I said no." I appealed to his vanity. "You always looked after me when we were youngsters. Let me look after you, this once. Standing shoulder to shoulder, sharing the adventure. I'm a man now, Ellery. All man." He regarded me with a curious eye. "Aye, every inch, if I'm not mistaken. Very well, but if I insist you must leave, you will go." "You have my solemn oath upon it," I lied, crossing my fingers behind my back. We rose late on Christmas Eve, bathed, and, after enjoying a light repast and having confirmed with Count Bitterbolikoff that he had no objections to my involvement, packed what essentials we felt necessary. At 3 p.m., for no ghost with any self-respect would think of appearing during daylight hours, I found myself standing as Ellery II before the notorious 69. It bore the features of a traditional Aragon villa, the favoured architectural style of many of the older houses built in the Bordeaux region of France, and was, consequently, somewhat anachronistic amidst the more traditional architecture that bordered it on either side. It was a large, gloomy, family-sized residence that we were soon to learn, through our thorough explorations of the interior, comprised 10 bedrooms, 3 reception rooms, dressing rooms, 2 staircases, a goodly-sized kitchen below, and ample servants' quarters in the attics above. It was altogether a large and imposing structure, from which the surrounding properties appeared to shrink in fear. A strange white miasma appeared to float across the lawn as we approached. Our shoes crunching on the gravel path were the only sounds to be heard in the unearthly silence. More curious still, perhaps, was that the window panes remained surprisingly intact, despite the house being long abandoned. And yet, according to Bitterbolikoff, there had been many a street urchin who had flung a brick determinedly in their direction, only to watch in amazement as they rebounded off their target before hitting them full force on the head and laying them prostrate for days. No dog would cock their leg up on its privet hedge, for much the same reason. The front door key turned in the lock with surprising ease, and admitted us into a great echoing hall. Lighting our way by match, we quickly found candlesticks placed on the hall table, which were fast alight, illuminating the cavernous interior. "So this," Ellery said, making his way to the foot of the impressive main staircase that swept up to the first floor and ascending 3 steps, "is where La Bâtonnais met her maker." He ran 2 fingers along the banister before examining the tips closely. "Curious," he frowned. "Not a trace of dust. The house has been empty for decades." "Yes, odd," I sniffed and concurred, "for I feel sure I smell the scent of lavender polish. Perhaps the house is haunted by the ghost of an industrious housemaid." My feeble attempt at a joke died on my lips as it was met with a savage look in Ellery's eyes, slicing my chuckle in half. Whatever we were liable to die of, clearly it would not be laughing. And I could not help reflecting on how drastically my friend's character appeared to have changed since we were last together. Life had taken us in different directions in the intervening years since our childhood intimacy. Gone was the joie de vivre of old, only to be replaced by the dour, nervy, humourless and ill-tempered impostor before me. We set to the task of exploring every nook and cranny of their many-faceted structure. At the top of the stairs and to the right, we found the bedroom accommodation complete with a fire that roared deliciously. Down the back stairs, we found the kitchen and outhouse. Returning to the ground floor, we found the front room almost immediately lit up by a blazing and most welcoming fire. It was a comfortable parlour, furnished with old-fashioned but solid and expertly crafted furniture. A side table had been generously laid with a cold supper and a selection of fine wines. Bitter Bolakoff, it appeared, had not stinted on creature comforts. We were to pass a remarkably quiet evening undisturbed. After wining and dining, we sat down before the fire and shared a cigarette, before each opening a book we had plucked from the bookcase, and settled down in companionable silence, with a glass of claret to hand. Our tomes proved absorbing, Ellery reading a lively historical account of the sacred band of Thebes and its crucial role in the Battle of Leuctra in 371 BC, whilst I read a compendium on the nature of all things paranormal. I read on thirstily, chapter after chapter, absorbing the information therein that was previously unknown to me. So consumed was I barely noticed the passing of time. Not a sound, not even a mouse in the wainscot, was to disturb us. The flames crackling in the grate occasionally punctuating the silence until, finally, I heard Ellery stretch and yawn, before announcing to my amazement that the hour was gone 11, and he had a mind to turn in for the night, if I had no objections. Having previously agreed not to separate whenever possible, I accompanied him up the stairs. There was only one four-poster made up, but it was large enough to accommodate two. Out of propriety and at my insistence, we decided to sleep top to tail and, donning our nightshirts, had assumed that position. Ellery's splendidly turned calves and bare but perfectly formed feet lay mere inches away from my admiring glance. Just as I was dozing off, I remember hearing a neighbouring church clock chime the midnight hour. It was the last sound I was conscious of. The house was as silent as the grave, the fire casting a warm and welcome glow over our recumbent bodies. The nightmare began almost as soon as I closed my eyes. I was a child again, a toddler, standing up in my cot, tiny hands clasped around the bars that protected me, my tear-streaked face peering frantically into the darkness. I wept and cried, but nobody came. And then, suddenly, out of the black abyss, a pair of evil eyes blinked. They looked like two hot-burning coals that flickered in the darkness, even as they grew larger in their silent approach. My little legs gave way, and I collapsed to a seated position amongst a mountain of blankets, and thrust my thumb into my mouth for comfort. But the thumb began to swell exponentially, swell and swell until it filled my gullet and forced my lips apart, wider and wider, until I was in fear of it snapping my jaw. I woke with a start to find my hands clasped around Ellery's right ankle, choking on the foot I had apparently rammed into my mouth. In confusion I looked around, wild-eyed, and saw Ellery regarding me curiously. I retracted his foot from my mouth and blushed. "A nightmare," I spluttered. "A hideous nightmare." "You too," he replied, his voice quivering, as he released his own grip on my left ankle. In the awkward silence that followed, I rose and gave the fire a rousing poke, then stood for a moment, trying to recover my mental balance. It was then I distinctly heard a low laugh behind me. Turning, I saw Ellery had placed a bolster down the middle of the bed, and, laid back in repose, he was patting it invitingly. whilst looking straight at me with glittering, darkly magnificent eyes. "'Tis probably safest to sleep right side up from now on. This barrier should protect you from my moral turpitude," he snorted in derision. I merely looked at him, wordlessly, staring with interrogative eyes. His face bore an expression of wild, hard-bitten insolence. He continued, "Look, cousin, I am determined not to lose my night's sleep because of a silly nightmare. Come to bed," he ejaculated, threw the covers over the protuberance, turned on his side, and took up a sleeping posture. I rejoined him without a word. Climbing under the sheets, I snuggled up to the bolster and fell fast asleep. For how long, I cannot judge, for it seemed a mere twinkling before we were both to be awakened by noises overhead, the sound of something being dragged across floorboards. Then another silence. No sound, but cinders dropping through the grate, and the ticking of my pocket watch, which I had laid upon the bedside table. I had occasion to pause and listen. Then the shuffling began again. What was that distinct sound, now coming nearer and nearer? Sounds approaching, as if apparently caused by something slithering down the attic stairs and along the corridor. My heart began to pound uncontrollably. Was I going mad? How could it be? But Ellery could hear it too, cold comfort as this was. He looked very grave, and, fixing his jaw, declared that he had never expected to make old bones, before throwing the covers aside, and ere the last syllable was uttered, arose. Arming himself with the poker and a lit candlestick, he strode manfully to the door, threw it open with a violent swing that strained its very hinges, and stepped into the darkened corridor. "Rashness is not courage," I called after him, but too late. The door had slammed shut behind him. In the instant I heard a hideous, horrible sound of squelching, followed by a terrified scream, then the clatter of some heavy object tumbling down the stairs. I rose then, grabbed a candlestick of my own, lit it, went to the door, and tore it open, feeling suddenly fired with a desire to see the end of the adventure. A great shadow flitted from the corner of my eye back into the darkness. "Ellery!" I cried, with all the power in my lungs, his name echoing and re-echoing in the gloomy, forbidding corridor. "No!" I heard Ellery's cry in response. "Stop!" But too late, for I had already placed one bare foot over the threshold and into the corridor. A viscous, gelatinous substance oozed between my toes, causing me to slip as if on a banana skin, though instinctively I had the foresight to grasp and cling to the doorframe for stability. Catching my breath, I looked down and saw a pool of whitish, translucent slime, which appeared to cover the entire floor. I looked to my left and saw Ellery crumple to his knees at the top of the stairs, clutching desperately to a banister rail, having nearly tumbled to his death. The look on his face was alarming. 'Twas the face of a hollow-eyed spectre. His hair, his chin, his nightshirt fairly dripped with the unctuous fluid. His voice quivered. "I have seen it!" He shuddered uncontrollably, as if in the grip of an apoplectic fit. "Dear God!" I declaimed. "What did you see?" "I saw," he began. "I saw what appeared to be a giant snake, but not so much a snake as a worm of gigantic proportions, yet not so much a worm as a bloodsucker of the kind we used to chop in half as children for a giggle, or at least I did." I blanched at the memory. Then it reared up like a rattlesnake, and retracting the pink lips in its eyeless face, it spewed forth its foul-smelling— I cut him off mid-sentence. "One moment!" I cried, aghast, fearful for his sanity. "Let me find something to mop up this slime, so I might reach you in one piece. We need to get you out of here." With this I turned and hopped back into the room, but had barely made my way halfway to the blanket chest when I heard Ellery's hysterical cry of, "No! Dear God, no!" And with it the door slammed shut behind me. Despite my furious exertions, the door refused to open, and so I was forced to listen in mortal terror as Ellery screamed. Screamed and screamed, protested and pleaded, swallowed and gobbled, choked and retched, and gobbled again. Finally, with a clatter and a resounding crack that reverberated throughout the house, all fell silent. I swooned in utter, impotent despair, sank to the floor and into unconsciousness. I was roused from oblivion some hours later by the peal of church bells ringing out upon Christmas morning. The fire had gone out, and the room felt unusually chill. Having first tried the door, and finding it remained immovable, I hurriedly crossed to the window that faced onto the street and threw up the sash. My eyes were dazzled by the blanket of snow that had fallen during the night, and then, as my eyes grew accustomed, they alighted on a young fellow of 8 or 9 years of age, wrapped up warmly against the cold, and dragging a rudely crafted sled behind him. I cried out to get his attention, and, at the promise of £0.50 for his prompt action, bid him find the nearest policeman and bring him back to that hellish address. The wan-faced Bobby who broke down the bedroom door said not a word. He merely stepped aside so that I could step out onto the landing. It was as I thought. There was no evidence of the glutinous goo of the previous night. For, as I had reasoned, ectoplasm, that method by which the spirit world interacts in the physical and real universe, cannot withstand light conditions. It would surely have disintegrated, as it had, leaving nary a trace. It was with a deep sense of trepidation that I turned to my left and strode to the top of the stairs, followed less precipitately by the policeman. I had only to look down to see Ellery Dickon. He lay in 2 halves at the foot of the stairs, his dull, dead eyes, torn mouth, and dislocated jaw yawning wide in abject horror.